HeadsUp is a growing network of school leaders, past, present and future, so people who've been head teachers, people who are head teachers and people who would love to be head teachers. And we offer ongoing support. In those support sessions, we create safe, funny, emotional spaces for head teachers to share the reality of the job of being a head teacher with each other, and to get that all important peer support from each other. And those are, if you've not been to those before, those are really lovely spaces to connect with other sort of values aligned school leaders and to create some connections. And that's what we're all about. So we're a growing network. We're currently about 600 active members, people who seek one-to-one support, or they join these sessions, or they join the Saturday morning sessions, or they are in one of our local authority regional groups that we are now increasingly running as well. So we've taken the HeadsUp4HT teachers model, and increasingly we're putting that into local authority areas who are asking us to come and set up peer support sessions for their local heads. So about 600 active members, we've got about 3,000 plus passive members, people who know who we are and what we do. And we always ask in these sessions, I always ask in these sessions, if you will be well connected leaders and influencers in your own sphere. And we do say that if you do know of head teachers who you think may benefit from being part of the HeadsUp network and benefit from the support we offer, whether that's the one-to-one coaching we offer for head teachers, as we call them, head teachers in crisis who are really struggling, whether that's the support sessions on a weekly basis, or indeed our wonderful buddy system that Kate has set up, then please do let them know about HeadsUp4HT teachers and point them in the direction of our website, which I thought was on there, but it's not. But our website, which Kate can pop into the chat in a second, I think. I didn't introduce myself. I'm James Pope, founder of HeadsUp4HT teachers. I probably should have done that first. Formerly a secondary head teacher, and now one of the things that I do with passion and with purpose and with a real sense of joy is work alongside Kate with this network to grow this network to support head teachers. I can't quite believe that we're on HeadsUp4HT number 8. How we got there, I don't know. But I have to say, I've just said to Kate and Adrian and Christalla that I've kind of been looking forward to this one because it's one that's really close to my heart. So HeadsUp4HT number 8. So if you don't know, the Big Change Manifesto was published about 18 months ago. And they've done a lot of work on really thinking about, what could our hopes for education in the English system be? What could we change? What could we develop? Specifically for the English system, but it could be spread to other regions of the UK as well. And they curated, as part of their manifesto, 10 hopes for education. We're now on number 8. We've had some wonderful discussions. We've had some amazing inputs into those discussions. And we always try to provide an input, but I will say that these sessions are all about you and hearing your voice. That's really, really important, because we do feed this back to Big Change. And HeadsUp4HT number 8 is that all schools are actively supported to improve and learn together. And if you can see the text behind me, I'll lean over, and the stand first or subheading to that is to rethink the role of OFSTED, to encourage shared learning and action between schools, collective responsibility for the success of all children. I can't help thinking about this one, but it's very hard to think about this one without thinking about OFSTED in its current guise, in its evolved guises over the course of the last 40 years, and arguably you can take it back even further than that. So I sort of approach this one really with if you imagine some metaphorically burnt fingers from my own experience of being a head teacher. So I approach it cautiously, but because of my own experience, I quite often get asked by various sort of media outlets, do you think Ofsted should be scrapped? Do you think, what do you think about accountability? And I'm always really careful what I say, because I actually think accountability is really, really important. What I don't like, and I've never liked, and I certainly didn't like being on the receiving end of it, is the culture that has been created around Ofsted in this country. And I think that, I'm always it's quite interesting, their intent, implementation, impact trio of words. You know, every sort of new framework, I'm reminded that actually the intent in reality is not wrong. The issue, I think, for Ofsted, but other people in the room may challenge this, and please do, is the implementation of that intent nearly always goes wrong. And the reality is, we've just had this discussion, but again, I'd open it up to the floor in a minute, is that the people who end up being on the receiving end of that are the very people that we need to stay in the education system and lead our schools. You know, many of the people in the Heads Up network are in the Heads Up network because they've themselves been on the receiving end of a particularly damaging Ofsted visit. And I think it's that culture of high stakes accountability, which I once described it as, you know, becoming a head teacher in the English education system is a bit like picking your ride for the Grand National. Pretty much, if honest, you know, form and function for any of those horses make little difference. And, you know, you become a head teacher and you hope you've picked the right horse, i.e. the one that's going to get you round all of the fences. And, you know, that is just the most ludicrous situation. And what we find at Heads Up is that we're losing really purposeful, really skillful, really experienced, really passionate leaders as a consequence of the high stakes accountability system. So that's kind of my view on it. I'm going to try and keep stum after that input, because otherwise I'll just keep jumping in. So we're really delighted that we've got Adrian and Christalla are going to join us this evening, and they're going to give us their perspective, you know, off the back of their own experience, but their perspective of accountability and how we might positively reframe the system that we've got so that we have something that drives collaboration and stops competition and supports and properly supports school leaders who often step into very, very difficult and challenging contexts, you know, with a real desire to do something different. And in reality creates a proper school improvement system rather than a pseudo Ofsted system, which is what, when you look at school improvement that's provided across this country, much of it is a proxy for Ofsted. You know, whether that's local authority level or whether that's a trust level, Mocksteds, you know, that whole agenda that has been created in the last decade. So Christalla is going to provide a first input for us, her perspective. As ever, we would definitely want you to be jumping on the chat and making any comments of support or agreements or celebration. If you want to be controversial, please do. We definitely invite that. If you want to be provocative, do that as well. But we normally find that we are all pretty much in agreement around what we think should be happening. So it'll be interesting to see how this one unfolds over the course of the next hour or so. Okay, so Christalla, I'll hand the floor to you.
Thank you. I've written a few notes to keep me on task, merely because this is something that arose today with my staff in the schools that I serve. So I'm an executive head in Tottenham of 2 delightful schools, and I've been there since April, so joined in lockdown. And I think if there are any lessons learned really during the pandemic to be adhered to and really valued, is that I've seen firsthand leaders coming together to bring about improvements. Now, that wasn't fear of a regulator, a moderator, or Ofsted or school improvement advisor. That is genuine community spirit. And today we've baselined our children in order to know what provision to have in place for after the summer, after Easter in the summer term. And some conversations from one of the schools I was in were saying, but is that what Ofsted wants? And my question to them was, but is it what our children need? So I think we become fixated with working around what we think other people want because of fear. And I'm just questioning any leader I've ever worked with, and I've worked in school improvement for a few years, I have never come across a leader that doesn't want to improve their school. And when you get to a particular grade, once you know you're fortunate enough to come out of what are troubled, sticky waters, you kind of begin to breathe, and then you want better and you keep wanting better. And what I was saying to my staff today is any improvement system has to be bespoke to the needs of your community. And I think the Ofsted one size fits all just doesn't work. So we've got a framework that's the same for early years, for primary, for secondary, and for additional provision. The language in itself, I think, poses so many problems. Now, I haven't got a problem with accountability, and I haven't generally with the purpose it used to serve or should serve, haven't got a problem. My problem is in the grading, the inspectorate grading system. Those judgments harm communities. So if, like me, you're attracted to disadvantaged areas, my question is, observing and judging practice in my school compared to a school in a more affluent area as being the same, is that fair, is my first question. And any school that's on an improving journey, does the grading system actually benefit them or harm them? Is it political, or is it really about improvement? So I think the stance I'm coming from is, I think it's linked personally to the whole assessment system. So the judgments that are made then create the downfall, then create the competition, then create this hunger to do what Ofsted want to see, where I've seen that lifted in many schools that I'm supporting that aren't yet at Ofsted grade level good, where they're breathing, they're getting children ready for secondary because they feel they have the freedom this year because we haven't got SAT. So I look at the primary education and I think age 2, there's a progress check. EYFS, there's a baseline, and the one coming out is the most hideous I've ever come across. After the EYFS baseline, we've got a phonics test. Now, I'm not anti-phonics, but it's not the only system of judging reading in any school. Then we've got Key Stage 1 that is kind of disappearing, but it's there. We then have the Year 4 multiplication tables check, and we end it with the Year 6 SATs test. So that's 6 times children are tested in primary. And that's not even, I don't know how many times they tested in secondary, but I'm not sure if that really is helpful. So I think by not only questioning the purpose of the manner in which Ofsted conduct their business at the moment fits our scenario, because we need a rich diet, the children need a rich curriculum. We need to sort of move away from what's being judged at the moment. So are we assessing in the right way? Where is the value to things like oracy, or why isn't inclusion one of the areas in the framework that we're focusing on? I'm sure if inclusion was, that would easily eradicate the need to off-roll, because actually if you're judged on inclusion, then everybody's got to have a mix of children that are the same. So my question is, are we testing or assessing a broad set of skills? Are we assessing values in action? Do we look at character strengths? Where are the pedagogies for all this deeper thinking? Where's the real world learning, the well-being, the focus on agency and all those attributes? And I'm not saying we don't need knowledge and skills, but where are the knowledge and skills that will give our children the potential and the ability to not only survive what's going on currently in the world, but communities of the future? So in a nutshell, I'm not against Ofsted or a regulatory system that monitors, that quality assures. I'm against the grading. I'm against what we are assessing in order to have that stick that we're hit on the head with constantly, assessing the areas that perhaps aren't always the most important areas. And at that point, I'm handing over really to the floor to say, I think it's a combination. I think it's not about abolishing Ofsted. I think it's about realigning and redefining their purpose. And I think simultaneously, apart from funding, we need better provision. And that will only come from peer support. That will only come from a lot of the inspectors. I believe it's about 70% are practicing heads. And I was one of those. And I just think we have such quality within leaders in our own schools. Peer-to-peer support is, in my view, a way forward. Remove the judgments, don't remove Ofsted completely, remove the judgments, sort out what we're assessing, and I think it will be a better future for us all. I think I'm handing over to my buddy here, Buddy, I think it's your turn.
Thank you. I couldn't have put it any better, what you've said. I'm going to come from a different angle and look at it from what is the purpose of education? And the purpose of education, as we all know, as we're all here, is that we're passionate about making young people become the best versions of themselves. And actually, when you take a step back and you look at it, and everything that Christalla just said, when you look at the assessments, that's not really what we're doing at the moment. And I feel really strongly about it. And as I guess all of you do, I think that, and if you've heard me speak, you'll have heard me say this line before, we're preparing children for a life of tests rather than tests of life. And that's not okay. That's not important. As Christalla's just gone through, all those hoops that those young kids have to jump through by the time that they're age 11, that's not right. And we're causing a whole backlog of issues that are being pushed down from the top onto the children. And that's what my biggest concern is, because those accountability measure pressures are coming from adults at the top, and they're being pushed down the chain, down to your teachers, who then put that onto the children. And that's what we've got a whole generation who have suffered from that. And we've got to do something, in my opinion, to change that. Now, that comes around by looking at what we're doing. I'm not against accountability. When I think about when I was at school, and it was, there was zero accountability on schools, in that what you got is what you got, off you went, nobody batted an eyelid. That's not okay either, right? My first 10 years of this millennium were under reasonably low accountability stakes. And again, we've come on so much as a profession whereby we know better now and we can do better. But what we can't do is we can't do that within that tiny little box whereby we have to focus on what are the results, and predominantly what are the results in the EBAC subjects from a secondary point of view. What are your phonics levels? What are your SATs at Key Stage 1? What are your SATs at Key Stage 2? We can't work like that, because again, I'll come back to it. The whole point of education is to ensure that the young person is developed as a whole. And we can't do that because what's happened, as we all know, people gamify the system. And unfortunately, that really puts the pressure on and makes it difficult for leaders in schools. So having sat in the head teacher's chair, you've got a decision to make. Well, I've got to get the grades up. So how am I going to do it? Right, I've got to get more English, more maths, more science. Okay, I've got to get these children from a 5 to a 6. I've got to get these from a 3 to a 4. How are we going to do that? And things get cut. And that's the system that we're working at the moment. I'm going to stop on that track, and I'm going to go back to really focusing on the question. But the question really centers around, for me, all those things I've just said, because that pressure starts at the top from OFSTED and the accountability measures. So how can we do something around that? As Christalla already outlined, most of the people who are in the OFSTED system are serving head teachers. I know from my own experience, whereby I've been working with schools and across schools in a whole local area to make sure that we help support one another and help drive that self-improvement system. We've got such a wealth of talent, such a wealth of know-how in our local communities. I mean, for example, in the area that I'm talking about, when I did this, there were 12 secondary schools in about a 10-mile radius. So our communities were all very similar, and we knew the challenges that each other were facing. So we could help support each other in a much more productive way than looking strictly at a framework model. I think that the benefits of that, it enables you to really get into the context of your school and your environment, and making sure that you can do the right thing for the young people that are in your care. Because what you need in school A, school B that's 2 miles down the road might be very, very different. And again, that framework doesn't take that into account very well. So it's about reforming that. And I think it's about thinking, how can we have the accountability, because that's important, but not to the point where it's driving people to make, in my opinion, really poor decisions, and have people who work with values, work to ensure that the young people get the best all the time, and their staff get the best all the time, and not drive them away from the profession, because we've got to deal with that. We've got that whole hole there, which is growing, and it'd be interesting to see what the stats are after the the pandemic has died down, and we're getting back to more of a normal operating system. But I think really working together, collaborating, and just using the know-how, the skill, the ability that is within the system already is a real strong way forwards to challenging some of those narratives, and making sure that people feel supported, and rather than threatened. And again, I know of a number of colleagues who have walked away from the profession because of the accountability and their experience with OFSTED, and it's been absolutely appalling the what their experience has been. So I'm all in favour of looking at how can we have a self-improving system whereby leaders help to govern each other and support each other. I think another thing that would be really helpful is to remove those gradings, because they're a gift and a curse. You don't need everybody to know that your school is inadequate, because what's the first thing that happens? Nobody goes there. Nobody wants to go and work there. And you get the positions for leadership, and they become a poison chalice, because as a head, you go there and you need time, and you need support, and you need stability to be able to turn that around, but you don't get given that. So it ends up in a vicious cycle. So how do we remedy that? And I think that's really, really important. And I'll stop rambling there.
Brilliant. Christalla and Adrian, that really fantastic inputs. I've got loads of thoughts buzzing around my head just off the back of what you've said, but the chat, as always, has also been on fire. But I'm going to open it up to the room. People, I think there's some fairly strong opinions coming through in the chats. If you want to share a thought or something that you think is relevant, I would invite you to do so. I will come around the room at some point. I think we're of a good enough size to sort of get, hear thoughts from everybody. If you've got nothing you want to say, then that's absolutely fine as well. But who would want to unmute themselves first and share a thought?
I'll jump in. Go for it.
Awesome.
As obviously somebody that's been in recruitment, Adrian couldn't be more bang on, and I've witnessed it where a lot of when I qualify teachers that are looking for jobs, they genuinely say, I want a good or outstanding school, probably 7 out of 10 times, and that OFSTED labelling is so toxic to education, and that I completely agree. We need to remove that, and by doing that, it would open up like teachers being able to move around with support opposed to restrictions, because I've seen it so many times where a teacher, because it's so sought out and there's such a shortage, when they do leave a school that they've been at for a while, the school almost becomes a little bit negative towards them, and they might be a little bit more spiteful, and that like removing the competitive barrier and being in a more supportive, collaborative approach to education and recruitment in itself is the way that we're going to move education forward, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you, TJ. Christalla.
Can I just also respond to TJ? Because the funny thing is, having worked in outstanding schools, good schools, inadequate and RI schools, I can quite honestly say a huge amount of the best practice is in your inadequate and RI schools, because there isn't anyone that wants to stay inadequate and RI. And I think the last thing, and I put it in the chat, the last thing a failing school needs is another flipping Ofsted judgment. So I think until we understand that actually it doesn't mean that the practice, for whatever reason that judgment was made, it doesn't mean it's a pit that we that you're stuck in. And my worry is what happens to those stuck schools? You know, how do we retain leaders who are just going to be drained and their well-being gone and issues are going to arise? How do we attract leaders to, you know, not everybody's attracted, like you say, you know, recruitment's an issue, but surely we need to be eliminating all those barriers so that it doesn't become an issue and there's more of an even. And I get the competitiveness that you'd like to see go. You know, we all want that to go, because it doesn't mean that if you're often in a disadvantaged area where those scenarios happen, it doesn't mean those students or pupils are less worthy of great teachers. And that's my concern. It's the retention not only of staff but of great leaders. It takes a lot of courage to take a failing school to better. And I think a great school is defined by passionate staff, great curriculum, the definitions of outstanding. Not sure if they resemble the definitions of what I have as a great staff. And there was a post the other day that someone put, how do I get from good to outstanding? You know, forget that. You're a great school. What is this obsession with us with outstanding? So I echo what you say, and it does harm recruitment. Sorry to interject.
No, not at all, Christalla. It's a really valuable point. I mean, and what I find fascinating about this topic is so much of this is interconnected. You know, it's sort of often the picture that I use is if you imagine a really heavy metal ball on a rubber sheet, so basically OFSTED has this distorting effect on the system, and it has this sort of ripple distorting effect. It's really, really interesting. You know, just some quick reflections from me, and then we'll go back to the room. But there's a school literally about 3 miles away from me, which is on its 11th head teacher in 10 years. 8 of those head teachers have been experienced heads with a track record of success in previous schools, and they've taken that school on. But I think somebody put it in the chat, it's the thing that cripples them all, and you know, the thing that I always respond to when people ask me, you know, what did you need more of because of the financial context in school? It's time. You know, we have to stop this sort of short-termism that we can transform schools in 2 terms. Not if we're going to do it properly. Every single person in the system knows that's an absolute farce. If we're going to get the cultural shift that is required to have long-term sustainable change in these schools, what you need is time. None of those heads in that local school have been given that time. The other point that I would pick up, because I think it's just, you know, some of these changes are quite simple. The grading is the single most simple thing that we could do something about. How can you define the entire work of a community of some 1,500 people in some of the largest secondary schools, 2,000, 3,000 people? How can you define the work of all of those people with one word? And if that word's a negative one, expect it not to be damaging. That's it. You know, you basically you tell your really hardworking NQT who has demonstrated real promise for the future that they're in an inadequate school and therefore they're inadequate. How do you recover from that? You know, it's just that the damaging impact of those. And Christalla, the thing you said that's really resonated with me is we all know, because we've all been there, we've all been in schools, the difference between a school which is rated as inadequate and a school that's rated as outstanding. The other thing, we think of this spectrum being really big. It's not at all. The difference is actually often minute. It's marginal differences that are used to define the entirety of what the school's doing. So much of what you've said resonated with me, but I could be on my soapbox for the rest of this session, so I'm going to have to just zip myself up. Julia, you wanted to come in on that point. I think you put your hand up very politely.
Yeah, I've put it in the chat now because it really struck with me. You know, I've worked in schools, I've worked in a variety of schools and led in affluent areas, but my heart lies in areas that aren't so affluent and in schools that need people who care about them massively, with a long-term vision. And I remember when my first OFSTED at my last school, I got a good, and the school improvement person says, so where are you going next? And I said, well, I'm not going anywhere, I'm staying here, because I haven't finished, there's stuff to do. And I said, it needs somebody who loves it. But it struck me that when you said about that label and the impact it has on staff, but that label sticks on our kids. You know, we'd never label our children requires improvement. We never would. Yet they're going home with a piece of paper that's telling their parents we're all requires improvement. So, you know, and the damage that has to communities where they already feel like there requires improvement is just horrendous. So yeah, I'm absolutely passionate about that, as you can tell. You know, and you know, I've had various labels for schools on one set of results for a cohort that actually there was a plausible reason for them not doing so well, you know, and having to really justify that to whoever came to visit. And it's just not right. It's just not right. Yeah. It's got to be a wider view, and it's got to be about more than just their results.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah,
and that, you know, I think the result. But the results point is really important because actually, you know, Ofsted have had a distorting effect on our assessment system. You know, the assessment grades that belong to children stopped belonging to children about a decade ago, when they became more important for judging the quality of the school than they did in judging the quality of learning. You know, we've had that. I think we've had that conversation in here around an earlier hopes for education. So I think that point about distortion. However, I am conscious that we are a positive community. I'm conscious that the theme of this Hopes for Ed number 8 is actually a positive. So let's switch it. What can we do differently? So we talked about all the things that are wrong. Okay, let's switch it into, okay, how can, and Christalla and Adrian and Julia and TJ have all made points about actually what could we do differently. So what I'd like you to do is just have a bit of a reflective point. And I think Alison, I think, may have put something in the chat. I'd like us to think about what can we do differently in the system that we've got that can disrupt the system. And I think Alison's suggestion is around putting banners up outside the school. Actually, it validates the Ofsted system that we've got. You know, that's one very simple thing that we can do. But how can we do it at a sort of micro level in our own regions? And then what might we look for and ask for at a region, at a local, regional, and then national level that we would want to see, do we want to change so that we can achieve the things that are behind me? So that the key words in that sentence for me are collective responsibility for the success of all children. So
James, can I just say one solution I came with my last Ofsted inspection? I turned it all around and the kids spoke to the Ofsted inspector first, on their own, without me in the room, and they made her cry. And the minute she had a conversation, she was in there for an hour, and it totally changed everything. She wasn't really interested in achievement data or anything because they were so vocal, so prepared to talk about their school and so eloquent. She just said, well, it can't be anything less than good, which was so actually there's you know, a micro way of turning some stuff around, I guess.
Yeah, and actually that makes Chris, I'll come to you in a second, but Julie, I think that makes a really important point for me because, you know, I think we talk about Ofsted in generality. There are some amazing Ofsted inspectors out there. There are people who really get it, and I think it's, you know, it's the issue for me in the implementation is the inconsistency. You know, if you get to talk to a really good Ofsted inspector who really knows what they're talking about, you know, they're nuanced and they understand the complexities and the nuance of it. But the issue is that not everybody's fortunate to have one of those inspectors walk through the door. That's the, you know, that's it. You just never know what you're going to get, and in a standardized system that shouldn't be the case. But yeah, I think you make a good point in terms of that as a possibility moving forward. Chris, you put your hand up twice, and I've cut across you twice, so the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you very much. I mean, firstly, just I will go to a suggestion of what we can do to change this quite quickly. One of the most significant things has been said so far, I think, was in one of Christalla's first sentences, which was about assessment. And fundamentally, we have an assessment system that starts with grading children in things that are then decided are important because they're graded in them, and it follows the system right the way through. And I think that's really politically expedient and socially expedient, for the kinds of government that we have in this country, particularly Conservative governments who believe in centralisation of power. And if they've got centralisation of power, they can then control the agenda, can't they? And therefore their dogmatic approach to life can be supported. So off the soapbox from that point of view, but in it, I think, is where I would love to see us go, and that is to give collective responsibility in every district and community for the education in that district and community. If you do that, you then start to say to schools, okay, let's say there's a collection of 20 schools in a district, and they're all collectively responsible for the educational outcomes of every child in that district instead of in one school. And then straight away you move the idea that they've got to be better than each other and they've got to be a label. As an example, I thought I'd weasel this in somehow. What we've been doing in the work that I've been doing is about that, is we bring schools together to work together with agencies in their own areas for outcomes for everybody, based around the concept that everybody is responsible for the outcomes for children with SEND. And so from that perspective, we've now got people working together really closely instead of against each other. So I think that's one of the things that I would do. Clearly, curriculum is a critical area, and Adrian talks about this a lot, in the sense that you know, if you don't have a curriculum that promotes any different values, or you know, from this, get this grade, get that grade, you must know all this, you must have all these skills, then that's always going to be a challenge as well. So I think there needs to be some collective work again around defining what's important for the areas that kids live in. So I think I would have a little look at that. And also, final point, one of the really horrible things is that when you get a crap Ofsted grade as defined by the world around us, the press jump on it with delight. And I've suffered from that on a number of occasions over the years in districts that thought that, as Christalla said, that, you know, if you're good or outstanding, then you're nothing. And we've got to stop the press from just existing to create stories, you know, and thriving off the misfortune of other people. You know, so many great things happened in my school, and I would always contact the press about them, but the only time they ever came back was when things went wrong. And, you know, I think that's an area to think about as well, isn't it? So we live in a society at the moment that's got all its values wrong. And I think that we've got to change that by centralising it in schools first, because that's where kids learn their lessons, isn't it? You know, and it would be nice to see that happen. So, yeah, of all that rubbish that I've just blathered on about, the main one for me is that collective responsibility. And if you get schools working together, then you have half a chance.
Love that idea, Chris, and I think it's one that I know that Stephen Tierney is also really passionate about. You know, coming from sort of Blackpool and the schools in Blackpool that, you know, have really been under the cosh for decades. You know, his view very much is that the solution is based in collective accountability. So all schools in an area are responsible for the outcomes of all young children. And you know, that's one of the ways of taking away the inherent competition that just drives schools. I always used to describe it, you know, one of the most interesting things in the secondary phase, if you want to expose the thin veneer of collaboration in a region in the secondary school sector, is put an advert out for a maths teacher. Yeah. And you know, if you've worked in the secondary system, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, because if you're a failing school who needs a maths teacher, and there are several other schools in your area that also need a maths teacher, all of the talk about how they might help you and collaborate with you to support you in your journey of improvement goes out of the window the moment people realise that they also need a maths teacher, and frankly, they're going to get the best of the field. You know, it's really exposing that sort of really simple stuff. So I think that notion of collaborative responsibility, collective responsibility is really important. I'll just put something in the chat. The other thing that I think is that we have a model which is still based on deficit, the assumption that they are there to find something wrong. And actually, I would propose a model based on appreciative inquiry, because even in schools that are perceived to be failing, there is some amazing practice going on. And actually, what we should be looking at is, what is that amazing practice? How has it come about? How has it been nurtured? And how can we use the principles of that to then move it across the rest of the school? And that is really, really challenging to do. Appreciative inquiry is really hard, but is actually much more sustainable and has a much greater long-term impact than this. Let's find out what's wrong. Let's actually focus on what's working really, really well and learn from it. Brilliant. Adrian, got your hand up. I'm going to come to Julie first, and then Adrian, you afterwards.
I just want to say I'm just in my first term of headship, and I know, so I just want to say I'm learning from all of you. So I just wanted to reflect on that term. So in that term, I've been riding the school through I call it the COVID storm, we call it in our school. And then the school I've identified it's got needs. But I'm excited about that. We're all on board to do what we need to do. But I'm finding from the governors who communicate with the SIP is very, very dated in the approach. Let's come in and observe a lesson 3 times a year and decide how the school options. I'm finding there's clashes there. And I'm just finding that within a term, I've been lucky. I've been grown from 2 phenomenal heads that are just ethical all the way. And now I'm having this, I feel very lonely. I feel very bashed already in a term. I'm so used to sort of, you do these great things and it gets noticed and you see the impact. I feel like nobody's noticed what I've achieved in a term. My senior leaders have and the school have. We've done a lot in the term. And I already feel in one term, I came home today a bit deflated and thought, because I had another visit today who ripped my SDP apart, because I decided to not use Ofsted headings. I said, I'm not going to use headings that are based on something that happens 4 yearly. So I've gone with, which is what another head I know does. He always taught us an acronym based on it. Always had to be pupil and staff centered, because remember, we're developing staff, not pupils, staff and pupils. So I did that, and I've literally been bashed about it twice, and I'm going to stick with it because it feels what's right for me. So I've gone with high expectations, equity, curriculum, and disadvantaged children, because the data's, and already I've had feedback from staff saying they remember the priorities and they've never ever felt that they're so right for the school. Where if you say to staff, we're doing quality of education, leadership and management, you're finding things for a start to fit those criteria. So you're kind of diverted anyway. And I just feel, I feel a bit lost, because I feel already, and it's a term, I'm loving the job, but I just feel we need, when it comes to accountability, what I'm missing, what I'm used to as a deputy and what staff get, is having that line manager. And I guess with academies they get this through CEOs, but then who do CEOs get? And I think this is where the accountability needs to be, that someone who's regular, someone who knows the context of your school very well. So I don't think 4 yearly, I think it should be something that's yearly, something that's very well designed for the needs of the school. It should be more mentoring based. And I don't understand why we need to publish, because now that's capitalism, that's just free market. I don't agree with that. Yes, send a letter to the parents. It should be, yes, the school is on track, or the school has things to work on, because parents need to know that. But that's just my opinion. And I just don't know how brave we can be until we get pushed out of the job. So some more experienced heads might want to talk to me about that.
Well, Julie, I would, you know, all power to your arm, I think is the phrase I want to say. And, you know, if you're looking for support, then you'll get it. You know, you'll get it from this network and this room in bucket loads. And you know, I think a lot of what you've just said is absolutely spot on. You know, and this is what I mean by the ripple effects, because, you know, I would have a conversation with governors about, I would look at your school improvement advisor or your school improvement partner, and I think you go and find somebody that suits you, because actually a lot of school improvement partners and school improvement advisors are actually doing a pseudo Ofsted job. In fact, many of them are Ofsted inspectors, and schools actively seek out those ones because they want to get the inside track and the intel. Actually, you know, you go with what you feel is right. And one of the things that you just said is really right. So I want you to imagine a world of the horse and cart. I use this analogy quite a lot, but imagine a world of the horse and cart. Okay, you can keep improving the horse and cart. You can make the horse better, and you can make tweaks to the cart, and you can do that endlessly. if we wound back pre the automobile and we focused on the horse and cart, and the horse and cart community was regulated by Ofsted, we'd never get a car. Because what Ofsted do is they hold the status quo. They hold you in that position. They hold you focused on what works now. And actually, how can you make what's working now work that just that incremental bit better? So actually, when you say something to me like, I had this STP and this is the way that I wanted to structure it, and it was focused around these things, that's the car. Because the person who is your SIP can't recognize it and says to you, no, you need to model something on the horse and cart, we have to be brave enough to turn around and go, no. Now, I'm saying that I'm talking to somebody who tried to do that and was, I used the phrase earlier, was a butterfly. I'm not describing myself as a butterfly, but a butterfly crushed on that particular wheel. But, you know, I think when I say we have to be brave, I mean collectively, and that's partly what Heads Up is about. We have to collectively stand up and go, enough of this nonsense. It's nonsense, okay? And you know, you will find that support in this room, and you will find that this support from the network. So thank you for that, and thank you for all that you're doing in your first term. Good for you. I'm just like, yes, brilliant work. Thank you for that. Right, Adrian, across to you, my friend.
Well, I don't need to spend very long because both of you have just said everything that I was going to say. You know, it's about that fact of we get those inadequate schools as they're labelled. You know, I've been in one, and you're doing things and you can see that they're really turning around, and then somebody who comes in for a day says, oh, no, you can't do that. We need to do this because we need to move to this much quicker. And I'm like, no, this is what's working for us here. And it's exactly as you just said, James, it's about being brave and saying, no, this is what we're doing because it's right for our school community, and this is what we're going to do. My trust, from a personal point of view, we got rid of 2 school improvement advisors or partners, because they were pushing a particular agenda that we didn't agree with. So we just let them go. So it's about making sure, you know, so Julie, this is specifically for you. Make sure that you're aligned with the person that's there, and if they're not, just go and find somebody else. I'm not saying that to the point of view of go and get somebody who's going to agree with you, but what I'm saying is get somebody who's aligned to what it is that you're trying to do and the vision that you have for your school, and ensuring that you can carry that out. And remember, they're there to support you, not the other way around. You're not there to do what they tell you to do. They're there to support you. And that's where I think sometimes we've got the tail wagging the dog rather than the other way around. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, and I think Julia, there's a really important point in there for me, because, you know, we talk about, it's really interesting education. We talk about young person agency, pupil and student agency a lot. And increasingly, when we talk about CPDL, we're talking about staff agency. One of the things that we very rarely talk about is leader and head teacher agency. And it's really interesting. And I'm going to put my hands up here. I work as a school improvement advisor. It's one of the first bits of work I got when I stopped being a head teacher. And I got this job for a group of local primary schools. There's about 60 of them local to where I am. And I applied for the job and I got the job. And I was really honest with them. I said, look, if you want somebody who's going to come in here and do the Ofsted shtick, then I'm definitely not your person. And I said, the head teachers that I support, there's 12 of them. I've been really honest with them from the start. I actually think the terminology is wrong. School improvement advisor or school improvement partner. You, as the head teacher, are the best placed person to know what needs to improve in that school. Nobody else, Ofsted inspector, school improvement partner, visiting for 1-2 days or even half the year, is going to know as well as you do what needs to be done. So I was really clear with my heads. I said, look, I'm here in a coaching and mentoring capacity. You know what needs to be done. You bounce your ideas off me. I'll write the documents that you need to be written. They absolutely love it, because actually, it's about validating what they're doing. And actually, the reason why the point about agency, it's about them having agency. You know, we wouldn't squash children's learning in a classroom by telling them what to do all the time. We know that's bad practice. We wouldn't do the same with teachers. We, if we wanted to develop and improve our staff, we wouldn't go into the classroom and say, right, at 10 minutes past 9, you need to do this. And then at 15 minutes past 9, you need to do this. And at 20 minutes past 9, you need to do this. Because that doesn't empower them. That doesn't give them agency or control of what to do. And yet we repeatedly do this thing with head teachers where somebody comes in, they says, I don't like the style of your school improvement document. I don't care, frankly. It's just the most ridiculous thing to focus on. Talk to me about the content of it. Talk to me about where it's come from. Talk to me about what the principles are that underline it. That's what I want to hear. How you format it, frankly, who cares? Anyway, sorry, I'll jump off my soapbox now. Wow, Christalla, sorry, you're going to come in, lovely.
I was going to say that the value and the effectiveness is in the outcome of peer-to-peer accountability. And I'm more likely to say, Julie, do you know what? I'm really stuck with maths. I don't know what we're doing wrong, but the transition from year 2 to 3, there's something. Whereas if it's a school improvement advisor, or if it's an OFSTED inspector or some sort of external body coming in that is going to judge me and force me into doing something, I'm more likely to hide the fact that I'm really worried about maths in year 2. And I think the openness that such practice would bring is about relationship building. And once we get those relationships right, then the improvements are no longer a threat. And then we kind of have an open forum for greatness to happen. But unless we alleviate those stresses, they're always going to be there. And we're always going to be clipping the wings of, pivotal pioneers like Julie, bringing this. I mean, I've never even thought of that. I just think, oh my God, I'm so stealing your idea. You're so getting an email from me, and watch my SDP change. And I just think, why aren't we doing that? And it doesn't always take experience. It doesn't mean if you've been ahead for 20 years that you've cracked it. You can be ahead for a month and still have an effective idea. And I just, today we said goodbye to 8 trainees from UCL. And I just thought, you know what, that is our talent. That is amazing. This is why I don't have to put an advert out for teachers ever, because we're always so lucky because we've got amazing trainees. And where they're not yet amazing, that's our job, to support them to become that. And then it's non-fear atmospheres and environments we create where they're not afraid to say, look, do you know what, upon reflection, how can I do that? And the mentor role becomes a coaching role. And then, I don't know, I'm with you on that. And it's not just about courageous leaders, it's about how do we collectively earn that trust, because at the moment we're not trusted, and that's why we're poked in these ways. So how do we do that? United Voices do that, and we have to. It's not about drip feeding, it's about blasting. This is what, with 70% of the Ofsted inspectors being heads, they could just refuse and we've won. But that's probably a silly suggestion, but that's what we need, don't we? We need that solidarity, because it won't just come if one person.
Totally, Christalla. And there's a Radiohead song from one of their first albums, and I have it playing in my head repeatedly whenever I talk about Ofsted. It always ends up. But there is an element of this, and it's really uncomfortable. I can't remember what the song's called, but it's we do this to ourselves is one of the lines in the song. And we have to accept that we are in part responsible for the creation of this culture that exists, and we therefore have to take on that responsibility. And no, I'm not going to sing it, whoever said that. Kate, thank you. Nobody wants to hear that on a Wednesday night. So we have to take on that that responsibility. And I think there's something in there. I wrote a piece a couple of years ago, and it was about, sometimes it can feel as a head in a school which is not good or outstanding, it can feel as if you're climbing up the side of a really steep mountain with a plateau at the top. And you think when you make it to the plateau, you're going to be okay. And that's where the rest of the profession will be. But we've bizarrely got this situation where if you do make it to the top of the plateau, what you find is by the time you've got there, the rest of the profession has moved over to that hill over there. And they've started to climb. And that's, again, one of the perversities of this is that where you're able to get the really creative and innovative thinking is actually in the good and excellent schools, and you just get left behind, and you're constantly left behind. So the system that we've got, if you're going to catch other schools up, because they're developing and improving as well, you have to outpace them. And that's really hard to do when you're in a challenging situation in the first place. And I think, you know, Chris's point about collective responsibility for that, I think would help to address that significantly. But leaving leaders to struggle up the side of the hill on their own is not the answer. You know, it never was the answer. It never can be the answer. And I think we have to challenge it. Sharifa, I'm gonna come to you. You've always got such wise words for us, and you've been listening. I can see you listening very patiently.
I don't know, everyone's so wise, and what you've all said just resonates and resonates and resonates. And in fact, I am in that particular position. I understand what Julie is saying. You know, I inherited a school that's no longer there because it's now an academy, but the last judgment was special measures. So anyone who hasn't been in special measures, ta-da, because the stink, we are still in that window. 6 years of this, 6 years we've not been judged, and I'm going to use the word judged, in 6 years, and there's still the stink of special measures, even though we're no longer that school. We are a good school. I can tell you now all the good things we're doing on it every single day, serving the children, the community. But the parents, some parents, because even today I'm showing parents around. Why? Because we are falling pupil numbers. Why? Because of the stink of special measures. And even today, showing a group of a family unit around after school, because I am so desperate to increase the numbers in my school, because we know that impacts on the funding. It knows that it just goes around a vicious cycle, isn't it? And the question that they ask, oh yes, but your previous Ofsted says that you're in special measures. No, but how do you? Absolutely, you know, and you still have to smile, still have to be positive. The parents that are with us now believe in us, they trust. There's so much trust in the school, and yet I am now waiting for the next judgment. It's almost religious, this Ofsted thing, isn't it? You know, you are damned by one word. You are damned. You're condemned to the depths of hell. You know, but it is, and it's 6 years of this. I've been there for 3 as assistant deputy and now acting head, of course. You know, and the thing that Adrian said, and lots of you said, time. Well, I've had that time. I've bided my time, that long-term vision someone just said, and it sounds, I don't know what the word is, you know, it sounds so, and I'm not trying to sell myself or anything like that, but the vision has been ours since the time I started there, because I'm thinking what we need is time, and we've actually had that time, and in 3 years we've turned it around, and I'm waiting to be judged. I hate that. I don't wait to be judged. We know who we are, we know what we are, but how do we, it sounds awful, we become a business, how do we sell ourselves? You know, because right now I can see a time that if they don't come, how awful is that? I'm waiting for them to come. If they don't come within the next 6 months, we may not be sustainable. What kind of pandemic is this? This is a crisis. You know, so I'm so sorry. I wanted to be more positive. I'm so positive about my school and my community and the teachers and the children. You know, so much passion, the teachers now, because we understand what's right for our children. We need someone who we will not know. That postcode lottery as well. We don't know who's going to come and judge us to say that we are good, if not better than good. I think that's just pathetic. Sorry. So I don't know whether that's wise. That's not wise, is it? This is my soapbox.
Sharifa, absolutely.
My soapbox.
Well, no, I never regret doing that, Sharifa. But you know, I think what's interesting about that though is it drives to a really fundamental point. Is that the question? Who are we accountable to? Actually, and this is a really important question, and it's been distorted. We're accountable to the kids and the families in our community.
Absolutely, completely.
Ofsted holds the accountability on their behalf. I think Ofsted have forgotten that, actually, and in its worst. You know, I can't help but come back to your own situation, can you? But so when my Ofsted report was published, and I had to go public with my parents, this is after 3 years of intense hard work around the culture of the school. The power of the Ofsted judgment, the power of the Ofsted report, and actually not even the report because most parents didn't read it, just the judgment. Okay, I had parents who, they were literally, that you could see them in this kind of conflict in their own heads going, but that's not our school. But Ofsted have said it is. But it's not the school that my child goes to. But Ofsted have said it is. And that's, you know, the power of Ofsted in our society has become such that it will make people disbelieve their own experience. That's how powerful it has become. That's how contagious, the disease of Ofsted is. There's another school, I'm talking about a school 2 miles in that direction. There's a school 2 miles in that direction that's been outstanding for most of the last 15, 20 years. Okay. If I want to buy a house, somebody talked about equity earlier on, Julie, I think it was you as part of you talked about equality as part of your, if I want to buy a house in the catchment area of that school, I would need to be earning somewhere around £300,000, £400,000 a year. That's all down to Ofsted. It's created basically a selective school in the state school system. That's what Ofsted can do. It creates middle-class enclaves in our communities. When Adrian, like you, when I was at school, you went to your local school. You went to the school down the road. And I'm not saying that that's what we should return to, but actually we should return to a position where you go to your local school. This notion of parental choice, that in itself is a false notion. Yeah, choice. If, Sharifa, you've got schools in your area, you've got excess school places. If you haven't got excess school places, there is no choice unless you've got loads of money. You've got loads of money, then you've got choice because you can buy a house in a catchment area of a school. It's a farce, the whole thing. Adrian, back to you.
Thanks. Some of the things that have come up in the chat have just brought me back to this point. But this notion of parental education, I think, is a really important one. I can talk from a personal experience on this, in that I got beaten over the head with a stick by Ofsted because a parent complained to them about the provision that their child was getting. There's a whole host of mitigating circumstances that they weren't aware of. The parent clearly was, and they still chose to not come to us, and they went to Ofsted to complain. Off the back of that, we got a safeguarding inspection. Passed it with flying colours because there were no safeguarding concerns. But that's part of the issue that people are saying, that I think is to why the system has to change, in that nobody came and discussed that with us, the professionals. We just got told, right, you got an inspection coming in tomorrow, and deal with it. Well, that's why we don't trust people, because it's done to us, not done with us. If somebody had come and asked us about the circumstances, and it literally was a safeguarding concern, and what I can share is that at that point in time, a child tried to jump out of a third-story window, and I couldn't have her in school because she wasn't mentally stable to be in school. But the parent then complained to us that said I'd illegally excluded her. Well, there's the context right there. Because I know if she had come back into school and something had happened, I wouldn't be sitting here with you now. I'd be in prison. So we've got to get that balance of trust right, and it's got to be a working with and not a done to. And
you've only got to look at the rhetoric. The rhetoric of our system, the rhetoric of the DFE. So you've only got to go back to dear, I know we love him in this room, but we've only got to go back to dear Gavin Williamson. Post-Christmas, if your school is not providing a sufficient online blended learning opportunity for your children, we want you to phone Ofsted and tell them. Bloody brilliant. Absolutely. Thanks, Gavin. That demonstrates high level of trust. Now, what's interesting about that, I saw something yesterday. Do you know how many parents phoned that hotline? 500. Do you know how many parents phoned Ofsted to praise their school? 11,672, which I thought was brilliant. So actually, your point, Adrian, is really, we need to engage parents, and actually we have a post-pandemic opportunity where parents, on the whole, not totally, but on the whole, are uniformly very, very grateful for what schools have done in their communities, and we need to seize that moment. One of the schools that I work with in whole education is based in Leicester. They've been bouncing along RI special measures since the mid-90s, I think, and they've done loads of work, like Sharifa, your story. They've done loads of work in the joined a trust, and loads of work in the last 6 or 7 years to improve. but you know, they've still got that stigma of that kind of previous history, still got that stigma, they've still got that judgment. And it was really interesting when the pandemic hit and they started doing all of the work that they were doing anyway with the community, but it was just more obvious what they were doing. The community opinion of that school's completely changed. We've done a case study piece on it for whole education.
Are you just
that community
school?
I'm not, but isn't it interesting though? Because I think that's happened up and down the country. And some of these parents who have basically been moaning about the school for most of the last 2 decades, and these local families are now, oh my God, the school's wonderful. They've done all the community outreach work. Of course, it was stuff that the school was doing anyway. It just wasn't as obvious. So it is possible to educate our parents. And I think Adrian's a really good point. We need to educate our communities about what Ofsted actually means. And we need to help our parents put it in the box in which it belongs. Awesome. Who else would like to jump? The chat is still going, so thank you for that. Who else would like to jump in? Andrew, how about yourself? You're listening very, very quietly. I'm loving the guitar in the background.
Yeah, I think.
What are your thoughts, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I'm sort of processing a lot of the things really. I missed my first time sort of joining a heads up sort of session. I became a head a couple of years ago, and then 6 months after starting, found myself unemployed for lots of circumstances really. But having previously worked in secondary education, one of the things that Adrian mentioned right at the beginning that I think is key is you know, what is the purpose of education? You know, a lot of the discourse these days is very fractious because everyone has a different idea about what that should be, and yet everyone is being measured against one very specific yardstick. And so that accountability system is narrowing what people are offering, but actually what people are talking about is offering a broad and balanced curriculum and extolling the virtues of that breadth. But actually the reality is they're not offering that broad and balanced curriculum. They're not offering, you know, certainly in secondary schools, they're limiting, you know, much of the access to lots of different subjects, partly because of Progress 8, partly because of the circumstances their school are in. And actually it's that relentless focus on very specific subjects that actually makes the curriculum not really very interesting at all as a student. You know, I mean, I've got 2 children. My son's in primary school, and I was talking to his head teacher, and he was asked. We've been having a sort of conversation recently about within school variation, and I mean, I guess where I come from is that understanding within school variation, I think, is actually really easy. Tackling it's really hard, but understanding it's really easy because you're talking about people. You're talking about teachers of being people of every different type and every different, you know, backgrounds and their experiences of work and life, and students and their people as well. And you know, when you have, you know, one class of people doing excellently in one subject, the reasons for that aren't just that that particular teacher or that particular environment is perfect and that needs to be translated somewhere else. It could be a whole host of different things. It might just be that student A doesn't like French. You know, it just might be that that's just not their thing, you know, and actually what they love is drama, or they love, you know, they love geography, or they love something very specifically different. But because we've narrowed the amount of focus, the amount of time they spend in a day, in a week on very specific things to fit the yardstick, actually, you know, education is not fun. Learning is not fun anymore because, you know, they're having to meet a very particular mold.
Yeah, Andrea, that's really, really good input and sort of really resonates with me actually, because it reminds me of a lot of the conversations we had really early on at Heads Up. You know, sort of going back to sort of you know, early last year, and we talked a lot about, you know, one of the things that we talk a lot about is that we're a human industry, and human beings are complex, and actually one of the things that the accountability system does is it has this reductive effect. on what we do. And the reality is, if you look at complex, as you do any research into complex systems, you've got two choices with complex systems. You can either try to understand the complexity and work with it, or you can try and remove the complexity. And I think we've got an accountability and assessment system that has worked really hard in the last decade to remove the complexity. And it's done it by dehumanizing schools. Actually, it's really interesting. It's reduced children to numbers, and then that's had a ripple out effect onto staff as well. So I think what you're saying is a really important reminder that actually at the heart of this is the purpose of education. What's our why? One of the other things that I've done with all of the free time that I had when I stopped being a head teacher, one of the other things I've done a lot of research into regulatory systems around the world. And what's really interesting about OFSTED is it's one of the few regulatory systems that exists in any sector around the world, if not the only one, who actually controls the why space. If we think about Simon Sinek's why, how, what, OFSTED in this country occupies the why space. It's the most bizarre setup because it doesn't happen in any other sector at all. What happens in every other sector is the profession holds the why space, and indeed they hold the how space, and indeed they hold the what space. And what happens is the regulator then works with the profession to decide on how that why, how, and what is regulated. What's happened in our country is Ofsted have occupied the why space. DFE have vacated it altogether, and Ofsted have taken the centre ground. So we've now got a situation where, what's the biggest policy driver in education in the last 5 years? It was a new Ofsted framework 3 years ago. That has had more impact on work that's happened in our schools in the last 3 years than anything that's come out of the DFE in the last decade. It's weird. It's absolutely not what a regulator should do. So I think so one of the things I think we should do in achieving this, and this is again comes back to this notion of working collectively, we have to seize our profession back. It's ours. Education is what we do, and it's ours. And we have to take it back, at a fundamental level, at a purpose-driven level. Because actually, the other thing about that is that's where we align. What we find on Twitter is lots of people arguing about the what. Actually, where we can find alignment is in the why. And actually, regardless of how or what you think an education should look like, we can at least agree on the purpose of it, and what, an ethical education and an equitable education and all of those things. The greater majority of the system would agree around that. So we can really coalesce around that and then have collective and powerful voice. I think that's really, really important. Julie, do you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, I just wanted to add as well that, and I agree with what Sharifa said about, and I think we all mutually agree that we want the accountability, we want some kind of structure. Something, again, that I got from Twitter, from reading blogs and etc., and thinking schools does this, and Paul Garvey has written a book about it. But I want to implement straight from the start of headship. I can't get into this old model that I just don't agree with, just visiting lessons and making judgments. That I want something better than that. So I've spoken to staff about, number one, we don't use monitoring, we say exploration, and that senior leaders and staff, we do this together. This is a mutual process. It's not being done to you. So we've kind of taken the dive model, because I quite like that, where you look at you talk to pupils, you look at books, you pop into lesson for 10 minutes. But then I've said teachers will be part of that. So they will be part of looking at the books with us. They'll be part of talking to the children. And we did this in my old school, and it was absolutely fantastic. That actually, then you use the coaching model, and throughout that whole process, the teacher was able to just sit there. Teachers are so critical. You hear them in the staff room, they'll assess themselves. I had that maths lesson today, it was, and then they all talk to each other about, just use some of those resources. They do that throughout. They were like, I can't believe the children haven't figured that out. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And they start reflecting on their own practice, and you generate a report. And they thank you for it. And they actually love that. So again, I just think Ofsted, and I mentioned this to the SIP, that this is the way we were moving forward. And she didn't like that. No, you've got to get into lessons. You've got to. And I'm thinking, I just don't know I don't know how to get rid of a SIP. I don't even know if I'm allowed to. Somebody said to me, you need to be careful because you're a brand new head. She's quite powerful in the authority. And most of my networks, thanks to Twitter, are national rather than local. So I haven't really got any local support either. So I just think, oh, gosh.
Julie, the first thing on that last point, can you get in touch with either Kate or I, because we can have a conversation about what you need to do about your SEP. You know, that is not on. As Adrian said, you know, it's your relationship, and it's not, you know, it shouldn't be in no more than Ofsted should be a done-to process. Then your relationship with your SIP certainly shouldn't be like that at all. She should be listening to what you're saying. By all means, offer sort of challenge, but she shouldn't be telling you what is not on and what is on, regardless of what her status in the local community. So please do get in touch and we can have a conversation. It'd be interesting to hear some details about that, and we can get some tactics. Kate, you're going to come in, lovely.
Yeah, because my toes are curling, so I need to say something because I've been so quiet and I've just been listening to everything that everyone has said, and I agree so much of it. So and I've written loads of notes and they're all over the place. So here we go. Firstly, Julie, you are making so much sense, and when you're speaking, everybody's agreeing with you and nodding and going, yeah, girl, you got this. You know, like, you know what you're doing. And what I love is that you're not being compliant. You're questioning that. And you know, you have integrity and you know that that isn't right. So what we need to do is kind of surround you with people that are doing the same thing and that have maybe that experience and that courage to say, I don't agree with this, and this is how I would like to do it. One of the things that I wrote down is that school improvement should be contextual and that needs to be respected. And I think that is one of the problems with the accountability system. Christalla, you mentioned it at the start, how kind of this Ofsted framework is one size fits all, and it's not. I put in the chat earlier a comment about measuring and celebrating a school that has a positive impact on its community and its environment. Wouldn't it be fantastic if that's what we measured schools on? Yeah, instead of data and curriculum. And I've got a bugbear about curriculum. I always, as a head, loved the curriculum development. I went into a school where there was barely a curriculum when I started. Ofsted rated good. It wasn't a good school. It needed a lot of work. Had a school improvement team that came in to support with that. But it felt like because Ofsted was imminent, it was a rush to get those things ready for Ofsted. And you know, that was like the goalpost, to get everything ready for Ofsted when they come. Actually, this was a school that needed a lot of attention, a lot of love, a lot of liaising with parents, and like loads and loads of listening needed to be done. And that should never be rushed. You know, you need to take your time with that. Listen, like, nobody knows that school better than the parents and the kids that are in the school and that head teacher that leads the school. And that takes time too, doesn't it, to get to know your school. Some other things that I've made notes on. Yeah, I suppose I've said this before in HeadsUp4HTs, but I don't think we are measuring the things that matter. I don't think we are measuring the things that help children to succeed in life, in terms of developing their own core values, in terms of being able to support the environment, in being able to manage conflict, and all the things that are really important. We don't measure them. And I think maybe Ofsted might comment on them, I don't know, like tokenistically. And I talked about those things that we do that are really special, kind of hidden away in the curriculum where we don't see them. Because they're not measured, we're not pushing for them. And that really, really bothers me. You know, like, I've got a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old. I want them to be taught how to draw, you know? They're drawing the shit. And they shouldn't be. They should be good. You know?
The next time I'm on a call with you, I'm gonna tell them you said that.
Please don't. I had to whisper it. And I'm cutting it out as well. You know, that's what they should be doing, things that are important. I remember being a teacher in a school, and somebody was said to me, and it always stuck, I think it's a bit of a cliche, but you know, we're teaching children to do jobs that are not yet created. Well, that's still the case, isn't it? You know, that is still the case. And TJ, you maybe want to jump in here, because I know that you're really passionate about that now. Like, are we teaching things in schools that are going to help them in the future and that employers really want to see? When are Ofsted going to realise? When are they going to bloody realise? It's archaic. This is why I was quiet. This is why I was quiet.
Yeah,
I'll finish there. If anyone else wants to jump in,
TJ's gonna.
To be fair, I stayed quiet for a long time.
You did,
right?
and you did. I was very impressed. TJ, do jump in.
I mean, Kate, you've done really well. I think you're so bang on the money. I mean, I will always kind of, in some respects, speak from an employer's perspective and as a business owner. And I think the biggest, I mean, I've had two young ladies start in the last week, and what I found really effective is to kind of get them to understand the vision, and then kind of give them the freedom to go and direct their learning and what they can use as their strengths and how they can direct like the growth of the business themselves. And I haven't done massive amounts of training in terms of recruitment or anything, but they just jumped onto it. They created a TikTok account. They've created a whole plan for the next 6 months in terms of what we're going to do social media wise. I mean, if I asked them to do that, it would nowhere near have been as good. What the point I'm trying to get at is, like, through collaboration, through empowering your staff, that is how you're going to get the best results, not by beating to OFSTED's drum. You know, like, there's a reason why Google have like all of these safe spaces and breakout rooms and such a relaxed environment, because people are at their best when they're relaxed and they're collaborating and they're bouncing off each other. You know, and I think that is that's what we've got to be teaching children, is how to work together and how to have some independence and how they can direct what like they want to learn about, because that's what where their passions lie, you know. And unfortunately, we expect everyone to come in, fit our criteria and our requirements, and they end up just like, we just end up dumbing them down because we're not looking at what their strengths are, you know. And we do that with teachers all the time, and that's how we burn them out, you know. And I think that's what we really need to change.
Awesome.
I completely agree. And I would say that, James, you'll agree with this. Schools are trying really, really hard to do that. And there are schools that are doing brilliant jobs, like from 4 years onwards. But also, it will only change when we start measuring the right things. So if you put a test in to see how well your children can draw at age 10 and age 16, you can guarantee that the schools will start teaching life drawing. You know, yeah. Like that's what it is. Until the things we measure change to measure the right things, the things that are going to help children thrive in life, then we're going to be a little bit stuck. But as solutions, I think there is something very powerful. And Julie, is Julie gone?
Yeah, she's had to go.
Okay, you know, I've forgotten what I was going to say about Julie, but she's reframing is what I was going to say. And there's something very, very powerful in reframing the way we do things. So I think there's something in that. There's something very important in sort of like peer support systems as opposed to school improvement, which I don't believe is always school improvement, and it's school accountability, and that needs to change. I think there needs to be less judging, less blame, and more compassionate accountability. Because, you know, us head teachers are not frightened of accountability, but it's got to be compassionate. I'm done.
Yeah. Thank you, Kate. It's a really good note to end on. And actually, you just reminded me of something I said all the way through this pandemic. I might put it in the chat earlier on. But, you know, what's really interesting about the world that we've been in the last 12 months, when we talk about collective responsibility and accountability, and we talk about peer responsibility and accountability, we talk about who we're responsible and accountable to. You know, I work with schools up and down the country, as I know many of you do as well. And you know what I haven't seen in the last 12 months without Ofsted on the table is head teachers put their hands behind their heads and their feet up on the desk and kick back and relax. You know, isn't that interesting? You know, the reality is we don't need an accountability system that's going to make us do stuff. We need an accountability system that helps us to do things better. And that is very, very different from the one that we've got. So I would end on that now. I would like to offer a huge round of applause for Adrian and Christalla for their inputs. They've got everybody thinking and talking at the beginning. So thank you very much both for joining us this evening. As ever, these sessions, this one's been lovely this evening, sort of with slightly smaller numbers, but these sessions are nothing without you. So thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you for your contributions. I hope it's been useful. If you've been sat and soaking it all up, I hope it's just been as useful. Kelly, I know that you're sat there in a slight state of shock. For those of you who don't know, Kelly operates in the Welsh education system, and she sat there just, I can see the shock on her face, but yes, this is what we're dealing with. So we can have a conversation about that at a separate time. As we always do at the end of these sessions, I'd like you to really think, you don't have to go public with this, but we always ask people to sort of think about a pledge. what can you do differently to influence this Hopes for Ed? You know, at a micro level, at a macro level, whatever you have the ability and the facility to do, what can you do? What can you pledge to do? And I think, okay, what I would say is I think we've probably got, I'm happy to take volunteers on this, but I think we've got, you know, enough rich material from this session to probably write a think piece on this one in particular, that we would put out alongside the video. So if any of you sort of stalwart Heads Up members fancy having a crack at that, if you want to pull together, you know, not the stuff that we've talked about, which is necessary to get to the gold, it's the, you know, it's the mucky stuff about what's wrong, but I think really sort of reflecting on that theme behind what I think we collectively think should be different. And I think there's some clear things that have come out from this evening's session around that, about the approaches that Ofsted could take that would actually make life better for everybody. So I think we can pull a think piece together on that. Thank you ever so much for joining us. We've got Saturday morning coffee morning. Our next one of these Hopes for Ed, I think, Kate, is post-Easter, isn't it? So I think it's probably towards the end of April, because we've got this funny sort of extended Easter holiday where for some people it starts on Friday and for others it doesn't start till the following week. So we will be back for Hopes for Ed. Our support sessions Wednesday and Saturday, Wednesday evening and Saturday morning will be running. We will definitely put some in over the Easter holiday so that at the beginning of the holiday, at the end of the holiday, if you need a bit of support, you can get it. So please do join us for that if that is useful. It's been an absolute pleasure. As always, you are an incredibly inspiring bunch of people doing fantastic work across our education system. So thank you for everything that you do. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, everyone.